Greetings of the season to one and all. As the year of our centennial celebration winds down, we reflect on the contributions of so many in our community who contribute their time, talent, and resources to make Mount Prospect a place that we are proud to call home, not just for our centennial, but for every day of the year. On behalf of our entire village board, staff, and the many volunteers who are helping to put the finishing touches on all our celebrations, we extend our hope that your home be filled with the joy of family and friends this holiday season, and that you be surrounded by love and warmth and moments of happy reflection. Our wishes for a Merry Christmas, a joyous holiday season, and a Happy New Year. Good evening. It's Tuesday, November 28th, 2017, and I now call this meeting of the Mount Prospect Village Board to order. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Jurasek.
Here.
Trustee Grossi.
Here.
Trustee Hatsis.
Here.
Trustee Hofer. Trustee Rogers.
Here.
Trustee Secatelli.
Here.
Trustee Zidell.
Here.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to pass along a message from Trustee Hofert. He dearly would love to be here as part of this discussion and presentation. Unfortunately, he's come down with a pretty bad case of the flu. So I understand he'll be watching us, and I'm sure he'll store up his questions for further discussion on this topic. Let me start out by saying this is a topic that has been a long time coming. We heard from our Finance Commission chair last week that he's been anxiously awaiting the results, as has the Finance Commission, on the space needs analysis. And our response was, we have too. So we know that we have a large number of members of the force here. We have our architects here as well. And tonight, we're not going to be talking about solutions, rather an analysis of our current space and the problems that we have with it. And I'd like to start out by saying that this is not a case of worn out stuff. It's not like we have dirty carpets and old furniture and drapes that need replacing. This is a case where the processes of policing have changed significantly in 20 years. And others will say, well, it's monkey see, monkey do. Arlington's getting a new police station. Others got new police stations. Now you want to jump on the bandwagon. And again, I say, to the extent that we have a building that is more than 20 years old in terms of its design features, things have really changed dramatically, and I know we'll hear about that from our staff here and from the architects. Things like technology that is demanded in crime fighting today and evidence protection, the nature of the crime that we're dealing with, and then the rules and the expectations of policing in the 21st century. So I am happy that our newly appointed police chief, John Kozel, is here in the audience to also hear this discussion. I think it's important that we have a seamless transition and a seamless understanding of what's going on. So it's not my presentation, it's staff's presentation, but I did want to set those expectations early because I know there are members of the public who, are going, why? Why do we need to spend this money? we on the village board and the finance commission had the advantage of actually touring the police station earlier in 2017, and we could see firsthand the real issues with trying to do 21st century policing in a building that was designed in the early 1990s. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Cassidy and to staff.
Minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need to approve some minutes. I keep getting ahead of myself. So we do have minutes of the meeting of November 14th, 2017. Is there any additions or corrections? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to approve them?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. And now, Mr. Cassidy.
Thank you, Mayor. I did appreciate your opening introduction. This is an initiative that was prioritized as a top priority by the village board in our goal-setting process during this year's strategic planning process. And it's not a new issue. This was first highlighted back in 2005 by then Chief Richard Eddington, who expressed, significant concerns about the police facility in its present condition from an operational perspective, from a safety consideration, and just being able to serve the public and complete a very changing job that has happened with law enforcement since the headquarters was constructed in 1993. The board did authorize a study back in 2007 that pointed out significant concerns about the space. Flash forward now to 2016, we've had the ability to work with Ray Lee from FGM Architects, who has presented I think, a very comprehensive space needs analysis for both our police department and fire department. So I'd like to ask Lee to come forward, but when Mr. Lee is completed with his presentation, we have a number of representatives from the fire department, starting with Acting Chief Eterno, to provide, their perspectives on the space, the impacts that it has on their ability to do a very difficult job in law enforcement in that very, very limited footprint. So Ray, turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you for having us here tonight. I am here to present the findings of the space needs analysis that we recently completed. A little bit of background. The firm I work for, we have worked on probably 140 police stations, 250 fire stations. We are well versed in what's going on in the modern world as far as 21st century policing and firefighting. So with that, I just wanted to kind of set the framework that we do understand the issues and maybe have an outsider's point of view to see what's really happening here, that another perspective on what they can be doing that would enhance their operations. This is an overview of the presentation. We're basically going to follow this. It's more or less the order that's in the study that was presented. And I just there is an end. Okay, there's a lot of slides, but we'll get through it quickly. First, we're going to start with the project understanding. What were we really tasked to do? We know that the village is looking for information on how to solve the facility needs for the police department for the next 40 to 50 years. That's the prime objective. This building was built in '93, just a little framework for you there again, and that means it was designed in '92. So when we mentioned, Mayor Jarusik mentioned technology changes, think about where technology was in '92. And we just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of how much we've advanced over time. And even changes in how policing happens, we know that a lot has happened as far as workflow in policing. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. The study basically was to review the operations and the space needs for both departments. And then we are supposed to also take a look at, can we use the existing building again as part of one of the solutions? And then, if necessary, what are some of the requirements if we were to build new somewhere else, especially when it comes to a parcel of land that may be required? Some of the goals were set initially. These goals were set in discussions with staff. Primary goal is, again, to identify the space needs requirements for both departments. Other goals, We want this study to help educate everyone about what are some of the issues, and also provides a chance for both departments to look at, what are some of their operational issues that can enhance their effectiveness? How can we make changes to help? This tool is also for your budgeting people. We're planning for, fiscal planning for the long haul, because we have to plan for these type of projects to happen. And then specific goals, if for the building, this is something that would happen more in the design phase, how do we stop these buildings from being obsolete in the future? So some of the questions to be answered are as follows, they're just, how do we improve the working conditions? And how much space do they need to operate effectively? I'm not going to read them all, but some of those are the big ones. How will future changes affect the police and fire department? That's a large one, considering some of the annexations that have taken place, and maybe there's other things that can affect the village. So we're looking at those too. Brief overview of the existing conditions. So the existing building is 67,658 square feet, and that includes the underground parking, which is about 16,000 square feet. So the site area itself, as you can see on the picture to the right, it's crammed onto a site that's about 1.5 acres. So if we look at the floor plans, you can see the blue is the indoor parking. The rest of it are kind of operational spaces. This is the existing first floor plan. The fire department's kind of in the, I'll say, the orangey type color, and then the rest of the building, some of the blue areas where kind of a light blue is a shared areas where they're used by both the fire and police department, and the green areas are used by the police department. Upstairs, kind of the same. The orange areas are more fire, and then the blue areas are more police. So let's get into what we are here to really look at. What are the space needs required? If we start with the police station, through meetings, identification, and study with all the different divisions of the police department, talking with staff, we came to the conclusion that this police station, if it were a standalone police station, needs about 81,000 square feet. That also includes 19,000 square feet of indoor parking for 55 police vehicles. Currently, their vehicles are parked indoors downstairs. Off-street parking, the requirements are 110 spaces. That's probably, so if you drove by this police station in the afternoon at shift change around 3 o'clock, that's probably why you see cars parked everywhere. There's just not enough there to start with. This also accommodates 45 visitor spaces for holding community meetings, training functions, and things like that. Why is more space required? Some of these were alluded to in the opening remarks, but the building was designed in '92. A lot of spaces have changed due to changes in operations. Information technology, that's a big one. And then accessibility. We've had things come like the Illinois Accessibility Code and the Americans with Disability Act that came in after this building was designed, and a lot of those actually require more space too, for things like toilet rooms, hallways, free space, stairwells, access throughout the building. But we're going to go into these a little more in depth. Let's look at some of the changes in operations. When you look at booking and holding, one of the things that we've seen here from an operational thing is when you're bringing a drunk in, why is the breathalyzer in the farthest point from where you bring them in to the station? So you're weaving them through all these chairs that you see there to get to the far door on the far side. When you look at that from an operational efficiency point of view, if a person's drunk, they could be flailing, they could be stumbling, things like that. Why are we doing this? It's when you take someone into custody, it is the police officer's duty to maintain that person's safety too. So why are we doing things? And the booking room itself is actually hazardous because the way it's functioning, you can kind of see it now. Anything for writing and things like that, the officer's back is turned to where the prisoner is being held. Conference rooms. Here's one conference room they had, and I just found out that they recently made another conference room out of another space. But conference space is desperately needed in this building. They need different size ones for different things, such as major cases and just routine meetings. Whatever they did before was more or less crammed into spaces, and the spaces were just so tight that everyone would have to stand up just to move around the table. Investigations. Here's a dramatic change in what's happened since the building was done. In the early 90s, before that, most of the work of investigators was out on the street. Today, if you talk to most investigators, a lot of the crimes are now financial in nature, and they're doing a lot of the work at their desks. That's a big difference in how they work. Less field time, more office work, so they need more office support. There's also new methodologies and equipment that they need, such as specialized computer programs, and some of these programs are tied on dedicated computers with, lines that have dedicated, like, information lines that are secure lines for information exchange, so they're not just like on a network. So things like that have influenced space requirements and investigations. Evidence processing. Back in the early 90s, eyewitness testimony was probably one of the most important things needed to convict somebody. What is eyewitness testimony today? Fake news. So think about it. We rely on scientific evidence so much today, and the space that you have now for processing evidence internally is very limited. More and more departments are taking on more of these duties internally because when they send out information for processing, it can take months to get things back, and by then your case has gone cold. So more dedicated workspaces are necessary. Evidence storage. In 2004, we had here in Illinois, a drastic change in evidentiary retention laws. Some cases, we have to keep evidence forever. Forever is a long time. And the amount of evidence intake that a department takes doesn't decrease year after year. So as you can see in this picture, they have to keep purging the evidence that they can routinely just to keep up in space. More and more departments are finding that they're running out of space to store evidence. Interdepartmental interaction. I'm going to guess that the way that the current building was designed was reactionary on that, it's too noisy, or we're too close together and we can't think. It's so noisy within our building. So now the building is designed in such a way that it's basically is segregated. You go through multiple doors to get to each division. You got at least 2 doors to even talk to someone in records. Between investigations and patrol, which have to interact regularly, there's, I think, 5 doors you have to go through before you can interact. Some of those things are just a function of the design of the building, and we need to, again, move back to a state where we foster communication for more effective policing. Locker rooms. Back in the early 2000s, they didn't even have bulletproof vests. Think about that. They don't have all the electronics that they have to carry on them now that need to be charged or need to be safeguarded. So all the things, let's even talk about training, all the training manuals that they have to store. There's no space in the lockers that were given to them now because they have nowhere else to put it other than their own personal cars or in their homes or things like that. So that's something that I think kind of speaks for itself. Sally port. Your current sally port was designed more as a garage than a sally port. And the difference is, in a sally port, you have to open up all the doors wide open, pull a prisoner out safely, and be able to move him into the holding cells. Take a look at this picture now. What is this sally port used for? It's more like a garage. They're storing in it. There's all sorts of stuff on the shelves. What happens if someone in there grabs one of the bottles or things like that? We're trying to make sure that we have safe space. Often, too, we have 2 cars come into a sally port because that's what's called a follow car, just to make sure that a prisoner, if he starts flailing or something like that, that there's 2 officers there to help get him into the holding area safely. Soft interview rooms. These are the picture on your right is typical of the interview rooms that you have now. They're more hard in nature. A lot of recent studies have shown softer interview rooms often produce better results for even the most hardened criminal. And also softer interview rooms are necessary for victims. Do you really want to put a victim into a sterile room like this after something's just happened to them? So these are very common now in policing today. Training requirements. Training has stepped up big time. We have multiple required state-mandated classroom-type training, defensive tactics, live fire-type training scenarios. We have to provide the space required to do this. We don't need a case where we've had incidents where, use of force has gotten out of hand because they didn't have required training. In the training room, it's very typical that we actually would design a training room to hold at least 40 people. This is the minimum requirement for outside agencies such as the training agency NEMRT, which is the training agency for the police departments that they require so you can host training. And why is this important? If you're a host site, you get to bring many of your officers in without any additional costs for training. So that actually is a good thing because if you're going to do a training exercise anyway, you usually have multiple officers. If you can bring outside agencies in, then you can bring the trainers in and have your guys attend for very low cost. So, tactical training. I just show you, like right now, you just store mats in a room. But tactical training, a lot of this type of training is hand-to-hand, defensive tactics, things like that, without pulling a gun. It's like, that type of stuff. The only way to keep up on this is regular practice. If you have to set up mats all the time to do regular practice, it becomes burdensome. So many departments today have dedicated mat rooms where they can actually, practice defensive type tactics type training. And it's used on a regular basis. Departments that have it practice routinely, a couple times a month for each shift. And that's what keeps you up to date, fresh, so your reactions are right there when you need them to be. Your firing range is currently in station number 12. It's an old style range. It was set up at the time when basically the only pistol training that they did was what they call qualifications. In other words, can you hit the target from 7 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards, and so forth, so you can pass the state test? Well, we know in the real world that's not how criminals are going to be waiting for you to shoot at them. They're moving and things like that, and policemen have to move with them to train. So modern ranges today are designed to actually set up for simulations, or simunitions sometimes they call that, so we can set up a true scenario. We might have like build a room within this room and pretend that it's a bedroom that we're entering. How do you enter it? Is there going to be a bad guy in there? So there's been many studies that show like scenario-based training along with live fire is some of the most effective training you could do for use of force type training. This range is not designed to do that. It's meant to shoot down range. In a training range, we can shoot 180 degrees all the way around. So there's a difference in there. And originally, this range wasn't even designed to shoot down range. You stood at a firing line and you shot. Now, we move all around the ranges, forward, back. We shoot it in prone position, crouch, standing, things like that, all different ways in all different situations. Workspace size. This is actually the Special Operations Unit office. It's probably the worst office in the building because 4 people work in it. Yeah, I've seen 3 in there and 4 in the 4th standing. It gets pretty hot and pretty warm in there, and it's really tight and it's hard to move. But there are many workspaces in this that are undersized. There's some, I'm not going to kid you, there's some that are fine, but there are many within this building that are undersized. And you have to remember the volume of paperwork has increased significantly. Think about all the state mandated paperwork that they have to do to basically for reporting purposes. So there's a lot of more paperwork than there ever was. Server rooms. Again, this goes with the technology issue. The existing server rooms are kind of carved out of an old lunchroom and telephone equipment room right now. They're not really dedicated. They're not really hardened. And, we try to provide modern server rooms with space for functionality and just redundancy. Your IT system technician's office, this is the people that work on your computers in the office. Probably the police department is probably the most computer-intensive division of your whole, community. So they have technicians that work there, and that was just, they took over an old traffic office for this, which was before then transformed as a patrol conference room. So this room keeps getting changed for many different things. Cybercrime. This would go right along with cybercrime, computer forensics, that whole thing. I don't think any of us doubt that this is happening more and more. This is actually considered in law enforcement an evidentiary type process when we're fighting cybercrime. You can't just have it out on a desk because you cannot maintain the chain of custody. So we have to provide secure rooms for this. Accessibility requirements. As I mentioned before, Illinois Accessibility Code, 1997, Americans with Disability Act, 1990. Each requires more space. In the amendments, you might have seen them, Like even a single-user toilet room, look how big they are now, you know? They're getting bigger and bigger to make sure that people have equal access. Then, just as a comparison with other departments, we thought we'd show this to you to show that, like, space is probably relatively comparable with other departments. And it's just a good comparison for you to see. And I think this will be probably posted later so you can study it a little bit more at your leisure.
If I could just clarify there, that 81,000 is not the current space, it's the
This is
proposed
the
new
needed
amount of space.
This is the needed space that we came up with on the space
And our
needs
current
analysis.
space today is
37,000
37,000
square feet.
So for the folks watching at home, today we have 37,000, and you compare it to the square footage in our neighboring police stations,
Mhm.
and where we think we should be at 81.
I think that's a good point. You know, so, as far as Fire Station 13 goes, you know, we're not as drastic there as space needs requirements, but we do need a few things. And again, you know, the current station, I think, is like 25, 26,000, something like that, so we're not that far off there. So, but there are some things that could be a lot better, like circulation, training requirements, and accessibility. Circulation and access is probably the greatest thing that can be improved in this building, and that's primarily getting from the bunks to the apparatus bay floor. Because right now, they have to kind of like run down a set of stairs. And imagine waking up in the middle of the night for an alarm and then running down a set of stairs. It's sometimes can be considered, you know, dangerous. Training requirements, you know, again, firefighters are also required to do more and more training, just like police officers are. So a lot of it's book type training, some of it's live type scenario-based training, and accessibility again. But let's talk about this, you know, the circulation access, communal spaces. Firefighters, you know, they work together as a team very often, you know, when they're fighting fires. And in this station, they don't really have many places where they can congregate, talk, go over things. You know, in fact, they're taking over other people's space to do some of that stuff. So we just want to point that out. Even though the existing day room and kitchen were recently redone, it's still small. To get a whole shift in there, it's pretty tight. And the building is, again, segmented, very much so like the police department. The bunks. There's no acoustical separation between the bunks. Sometimes people like to study while other people's are sleeping, so we have issues there. And then even what we place in the bunks, you know, places to store linens and stuff like that, we provide as a matter of course. This is the access stair down to the apparatus bay floor from the bunk room. So imagine going down that in the middle of the night in a hurry. I don't think I have to say much more than that. So. Circulation and access around the site. Yeah, we're on a 1.5 acre site, which is great, but if you take a look at Northwest Highway, which is the diagonal road to the bottom, and try to back a fire truck in on that. It's just not easy. And like even for them to reload the ladder truck, they drive through the neighborhood and bring it in, you know, through the backside. So it's just circulation on this site is difficult. Office space, the existing radio room. This is the radio room. 5 people often are in this room working. This is a congregation space. You know, battalion chiefs share one office with one desk. And often, this is very regular, a battalion chief still has to stay over a little longer to finish up his paperwork, so the BC coming on is waiting around because he has nowhere to work. So this is a regular thing in the fire department. The library, you know, works great. You know, firemen do a lot of studying on things, you know, and refresher type courses and things. They need a place to study. Great for that. But this room often turns into a training room, and they'll have like sometimes 20, 30 people standing there while someone's shouting over some like routine training type, refresher type stuff. So just because the existing training room gets double booked often. Storage, lack of storage. They're putting a lot of stuff at Station 14. Unfortunate thing is the people that are responsible for handing out that equipment and responsible for the equipment are housed at Station 13, all the battalion chiefs. So what do? They start storing things in the hose tower, and that's where you're supposed to be drying hose and things like that. So we're starting to change the functions of space for what they're meant for. Classroom training, again, you know, we're trying to seat 40 people so we can host outside training. Tactical training, nowhere really to do it. Station 13 is the optimal place for the fire department to host training for their fire department because it's central. So you can bring departments in, from Station 12 to Station 14 into this station and train here, and you still have people that can respond back relatively quickly to their respective areas. If you were to host training, for example, at Station 14, and you were from Station 12, it's going to take you a little while to get back. So this is the optimal place to do it, but there's nowhere to even park. So if you think about that they're bringing apparatus there, where do we put them? We also looked at what happens if you combine the building. We would need this size space. We can save and double up on mechanical rooms, and maybe some of the classrooms and things like that. We save a couple thousand square feet. I think it was close to 3,000 square feet in size. Parking, we actually save on too, because we don't have to double up on all of the shift parking, because during shift change, you need to double up on parking. The police shift changes do not coincide with the fire department shift changes, so we can save on parking. We actually saved about 40 spaces in parking. So just give you that. Land requirements. This is simple. We looked at two scenarios. What happens if we're in a residential district? What happens if we're in a business district? So if we look at the police station, in a residential area, we need at least about 3.5 acres. And in a, whatever you call it, a business type district, we need about 3 acres. Fire station, you can see the same type of things there. And same with the headquarters, if they're combined. So the existing building, can we use this for a police department? You can obviously use it for a fire department because it's plenty big, but there's going to be a lot of leftover space. So we have like a building that's 37,000 square feet, and we have a fire department that needs like 28,000 square feet. There's a lot of leftover space. But what happens, can we put a police department in there? I should say, the existing building, 67,000 square feet, sorry. So the existing police station occupies about 55% of the existing building. The space needs shows about 81,000 square feet. The existing building is 67,000 square feet. So we would need to reduce the building by 17% to fit it in there. Would this be better than they are now? Absolutely. Will this meet one of the primary goals? Remember, 30, 40, 50 years we're looking for this building to be able to be serviceable. I have to doubt that, because some of the things that we have to cut out. We'd probably start looking at eliminating the community room and using spaces here. Number of interview rooms we probably have to reduce, and maybe functions such as a crime analyst, which more and more departments are having crime analysts to do predictive policing work. You don't have one now, but I don't have room to put in the offices. Evidence storage areas, we'd reduce them back down in size. You can see all the things that we'd have to do. We'd leave the firearms training range back at Station 12. So the question is, will this meet the long-term needs? I think it'd be great for an intermediate step, but for long-term needs, I would have to say no, it will not meet the long-term needs. So getting back to the questions that need to be answered. What's the best path for improving the working conditions for each? Well, focus on the police department. We think that its best would be to replace the facility, so you can meet the long-term needs. If the goal is 40, 50 years, that's the true goal. Let's do that. The fire department can actually, if we can figure out what to do with the existing building, or, fortunately it requires much less space than anything else. That's a different question altogether. Can the building be renovated to provide a functional police or fire station? Again, we went over that. Its size doesn't meet the needs of the police station. Number 3, we answered. Number 4, does having the police and fire department together in one facility increase operational effectiveness? From our time, we spent a lot of time in both departments. We saw very little interaction between each department. They have very specific functions assigned to each. Their basic interactions are more on if there's an incident outside in the community. Within the community, within the station, they're pretty much working on their own, so we don't see any significant synergies that would really help for them to stay together. And how will future changes affect police and fire? I think we've talked about this, land annexations and the need of more developed senior assisted living facilities take place within town. Those tend to have heavier call volumes, and land annexations could mean an additional patrol beat. which would affect operations. Additional patrol beat may also require additional investigators, things like that, so. Is there a potential for consolidation of services? Maybe, but I know that they've also talked to adjacent towns, which are actually planning fire stations and things like that. And many of the adjacent towns aren't that interested in doing something to consolidate. So it's not like 911 services where you can do it kind of anywhere. People still want their response times. They want them in their community. They don't want them responding from another adjacent community. How can the building be designed to be adaptable? With this analysis, we did provide space to include future new technologies. For example, like the cybercrime labs, we probably, you don't have all that now. We put it in there. We put in plenty of room for server space for IT type functions and plenty of space for technological changes in the department. So with that, questions? I know we went through it pretty quick. So.
Mr. Siddell.
You went through a whole lot
Yes,
of information
in half an hour.
in a brief period of time. And I appreciate the briefness, especially for a presentation before the board, because you have to keep our attention. But I think what might have been missed in this is some of the impact of some of the things that you went over quite briefly. For example, the interview rooms. Sometimes there are situations where the perpetrator, the witness, and the victim are all in the same place at the same time in this building. That has to stop.
And separation is critical.
Is critical of those people, because you could have a violent perpetrator.
You can have a
who-
domestic where a
domestic
husband and wife are having issues. You need to keep them far away from each other.
Exactly, and there are cases where this building cannot accommodate that now. To me, that's one of the most impressive ones. But as you were going through this, a flood of memories came back from touring the operation. And those offices that you showed are even more congested than they appeared to be on TV. If you had people sitting in those chairs, you would realize how close together the backs of those chairs are and how difficult it is to perform any kind of work or to focus on anything. One person might be on the phone, another one might be trying to type, another one might be looking something up on the computer. They're all in the same place at the same time, and it's extremely, extremely difficult to effectively perform your work, much less an efficient way to perform your work. So I kind of wanted to point that out. I appreciate greatly the fact that you covered all of the major issues that we also had seen firsthand. But in doing so, I don't think you had the time to give them the credit that they deserve and how critical they are to policing operations. And I think the other thing you pointed out, and I think you did a pretty good job of pointing it out, is on the fire side of things, there is a huge lack of training space, even for the fire department. And you did, thank goodness, point out that the fact that the firing range, the training range, not only is it inadequate in size and design by today's standards, but it's also on the other end of town. And you're taking officers away, well, I know they have, schedules for all of these things, but still, you're taking them away from where the action might be in order to accommodate that. So
It's also disruptive to the fire department when they're there shooting.
exactly, that's the other thing, because again, there's a fire department operation at that fire station, and that's quite critical as well, so. But I appreciate you pointing out, to me, what are some of the glaring problems that exist today in that building with regard to police operations, and certainly looking forward, it would be very difficult to accommodate it in that footprint. So thank you, appreciate it.
I think those are really good questions, and it adds the color to what our architect is presenting to us. Mr. Cassidy tells me that staff is going to be making some presentations where we'll get that.
So I can be quiet?
No, it's important to the whole thing, because to have
It is.
an architect describe things in a very cold analytical way is one thing, but to add the color.
You're going to
and
get the color
anecdotes-
commentary from the police department.
Yeah.
Very good.
That's going to be really critical. And these are not decisions to be taken lightly, because they involve a huge amount of resources and a disruption of operations while you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. So it's really critical. So Trustee Rogers, do you have something for the architect? And then I think we're going to move to the presentations.
Certainly, we all did that tour, and the points that you're making are really prudent. What's happened is that we are inadequate for today's, certainly the police department. And I don't know if maybe the question should be to the police chief. Do you know how many police patrol officers we had in '93 versus how many that we have today?
I think they were at 70.
Correct. That actually is part of our presentation, but in 1993, we had 70 sworn police officers. In 2017, we have 83. We've increased 18.6% in personnel.
So about a 15% increase in the total manpower.
Correct.
But at the high point, I think we've been at 94 sworn.
92, 94, correct, at our peak. in the
Yeah, that was
ranges.
before we did that cut in 2010.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I think the department is still analyzing the effects of the recent annexations. too.
So the annexation, I wrote down 2 questions for myself, and whether you answer them, Mr. Lee, or perhaps staff can deal with them in their presentations. You can sit down and wait, but one thought I had was, you talked about evidence storage, in some cases forever and perpetuity. I think about remote data storage banks, you know, they put them in a cave somewhere and they're forever. Is there a possibility of an off-site long-term evidence storage that would reduce the space pressure here?
Yes.
And I'd be interested operationally, hearing from the police whether that kind of a thing works. And then secondly, on annexations, I know you brought it up, we've actually been pretty proud of the fact that the annexations that we have done have not required an increase in service. But certainly to the, and they've been mostly on the south end of the village. To the extent we think about any annexations in other directions, clearly service level is going to be something that we're going to have to consider. They're much more residential in nature up there versus the commercial and industrial, which we tended to annex to the south. The kind of cost pressures and service pressures that we might get, as you're anticipating here, would be considered even before we did an annexation going forward.
That's good.
Okay. Okay, let's hear from staff, I think. Who's next?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. As Ray identified in his study, many of the current spaces in the police department are now inadequate by 21st policing standards. Changes in policing, including rules, regulations, procedural issues, and even some state mandates that we now have to follow can influence space requirements. Some examples we deal with are booking and holding facilities, conference rooms, criminal investigations, evidence processing and storage, interdepartmental interaction, locker rooms, training, and workspace size, just to mention a few. In a few minutes, various members of the police department will be coming up and talking about their personal experiences with our current facility. Deputy Chief Griffin and myself had discussed this issue about whether we should do the presentation individually, but after speaking with Mr. Cassidy, we decided to get various staff's input. I think it's important for not just the board, but the community to understand different perspectives of what our people experience, because what a records clerk may experience is very different than what a police officer may experience, and conversely, a staff member. So I think it's important to have different perspectives on our facility and how some of the shortcomings with the building have impacted our operations and how we have to counter those. You'll be hearing from officers and command staff from a variety of divisions and divisions and units within the police department. One of the things I think we have to mention is, I understand this is a very publicly unfavorable topic to discuss, especially since our current facility is only 25 years old, approaching 25 years. And I've spoken to some residents about this over the last month or so. I know a lot of people have the analogy that my house is 25 years old. Why would you possibly need a new facility? I completely understand that perspective. Unfortunately, though, as it's been discussed earlier, some of the requirements that policing have to attend to have drastically changed over the last 25 years. And not to knock when they planned this building, but there was very little future growth potential embedded in this building. I started in 1997. The building we occupied in 1993. 4 years later, we were bursting at the seams. And we've tried to change various workspaces over the decades to accommodate various things, whether it be a traffic unit, special operations unit. We've continually changed one specific office multiple times because of different purposes. We're at a point now where I believe it's almost mission critical. We just don't have any more space to go to. We've encroached in some of the common areas that we share with the fire department. We've taken away from training areas. We're at a point now where I think we need to come up with some type of discussion on this, and that's why we're here today, to listen to the direction and find out what the board would like us to do. But again, I don't want it to be lost on us that we understand some of the public concerns about this. From the outside, the building's a beautiful brick facade. Once you walk in these doors, which I know the board has had the pleasure of doing in 2015, you see a very different look on the facility. The layout's not ideal. As Ray mentioned earlier, everything's compartmentalized, whether you're in records, patrol, investigations, administration. There's no common areas for people to interact with, meet with one another. Some of the areas that we bring our public to, I think, is less than ideal as well. Our current building, in my opinion, is very far from a modern policing facility, which is what we're looking to get to. This topic, as Mr. Cassidy alluded to, has already been in discussion in the police and has been on our radar for the last 12 years, going back to Chief Richard Eddington. Previous 4 police chiefs have all recognized the deficiencies that the building has, and we've talked about it. In fact, in 2006, a space needs study was ordered. Mr. Lee conducted that space needs study, but unfortunately, none of the recommendations or his findings regarding the police department were ever addressed. One of the things, as we mentioned earlier, we've seen significant growth in personnel. In 1993, again, we went from 70 officers to 83 for an 18.6% increase in personnel. That's just a quick overview. But really, I think on a larger scale, in the last 25 years, we've assigned so many new specialty positions that never existed back in the early 90s. Some of the examples are, we now have a crime-free housing coordinator, which we never had. We have a mobile video recording review officer. We now have an administrative sergeant, an operations commander, a special investigations unit, which focuses in on narcotics. That's a 3-person unit when fully staffed. Special operations unit, which focuses in on gang activity. That's a 4-person unit. An administrative commander, a police network administrator, and a police social worker who all work out of that police department that didn't exist 25 years ago. We've had to create new working spaces for all of these people. And I will tell you from a personal standpoint, it's very difficult. We've had to, again, commandeer some common areas between us and the fire department with the fire department's permission, but we've pretty much stretched our limits as far as we can. What we'd like to do now is I'd like to bring up Commander Bob Smith and Officer Mark Bechtold, and they're going to give you a perspective on what our patrol section encounters on a daily basis.
Hi, I'm Robert Smith. I've been at the village for nearly 30 years. I remember the police department preceded this one, and when we moved in, we were very happy to move into that building. It was brand new. We were very excited. But just like Deputy Chief Paterno said, that quickly the department, it was too big for the building. I mean, we barely had enough space when we moved in '93, and it's just gotten worse since then. So we're going to talk about the patrol section. That's where Officer Bechtold and I are from. This is, you saw a picture that Mr. Lee showed of the roll call room. This is what the roll call room looks like when we're conducting roll call. Now, this is a C shift a couple days ago, and this is a standard roll call with the number of officers working and the number of sergeants. Commander McGuffin is there, as many of us from the administrative staff go down to roll call. There's one open seat, there's one chair missing, but it's basically standing room only. And this is also where we conduct some training. It's, as you can see, it's just not big enough. Standing room only in the back. We also house the mailboxes for the officers in there, the radios. During roll call or any other time that we're conducting official training there, that area is not available to the other officers that are working. So they can't come in here and check their mailboxes when it might be convenient for them because we're using every inch of space that we have against that wall with the radios and mailboxes in the roll call room.
So this is not a staged photo. This is when we break roll call every shift, and we have 3 different shifts. We break roll call, one shift of officers is walking out, and another group of officers is coming in. And you can see trying to get 2 officers going each direction down the hall is a tight squeeze when we have our duty bags and everything laid out in the hall because there's no room in the lockers for those. So we have those out in the hall station during roll call. And so that opportunity of switching off is very tight, both getting out to the garage and then, as we're going to see, once we get out to the parking garage. When we go out, unlike a county department where officers take the cars home, we do not have that luxury. One shift finishes, they bring the squad cars in, and the next shift takes those cars out. So we have this overlap at shift time, and you can see where the squad cars are stacked up, and criminals don't pay attention to the time of day. So there could be, and we've seen that many times, where a hot call comes out at shift change, and so somebody's trying to get their squad out, and then we've got 3 squads that we have to shuffle out of the way. And I work day shift, so at 7 o'clock in the morning is when I'm starting, and that's also when several of the fire personnel are coming down in their personal vehicles to park there. And so the congestion is compounded then. And so I would say that this is very tight and too tight for the amount of parking that we need in our underground garage.
This is just an example of P19 there. It's not necessarily the car that's in the aisle that's going to be responding to the call because they're assigned. We don't just change cars when we have to go to a call. Then P19 might be the car. We have to wait till the other officer is occupying that car to move it, just so that P19 could be driven to the call because they're divided up in the north and south side of town.
This is our front lobby area, and so many people in the community have come in there for any kind of police services, and they walk up to the front desk there. And this is the library area, and you can see that door on the left there. That's the secure entrance, and it's a card swipe that gets us in there. And so once we open up that door to bring someone who has a complaint back there, then we go ahead and walk through there. And we take everybody, whether it be a suspect, a victim, somebody who needs to get their fingerprints taken for a business and is a resident of Mount Prospect, they all go through the same area into the secure work area. And so this is the copy machine, right, when you walk through there. So we have officers that might be copying or forwarding on sensitive documents there, and we walk the public right through the workstation to get to the interview area. And so this, then you see the hallway, at the end of the hallway there is where, when you come into the back area, and where this chair is, that's the report writing area. And so this is the tight hallway that we have, and we have 2 interview rooms then that we utilize in that hallway. And this is our cold, concrete, sterile interview rooms that we have, which is fine if you have a suspect of a crime, but a lot of times we bring people back there that are victims of some crime. And we might have a victim of domestic battery or some kind of a horrible personal crime, and we bring them into this concrete room. And on multiple occasions, I start off trying to break the ice, kind of apologizing for
they're a victim and they're coming and they feel like they're being locked up. And so we feel, and then plus the size of these rooms, I mean, this is actual size. You have a small table and a couple of chairs. And there's times where we have juveniles come in there and both of their parents come in. And then we're packed in there when you need a juvenile officer and the reporting officer there. So you're dealing with 5 people in that small room because those are the spaces that we have to deal with.
An important point here is we're bringing them in a secure area where all the daily business of the police department is happening. They're being brought in to file a report. A lot of police departments have those areas outside in the lobby, like break-off rooms that they can interview people out there instead of bringing them in to the inner police department. In today's environment, we actually have a security wand by the entrance there to wand down the people, make sure they don't have weapons.
And this is our report writing area, so we have 3 computer terminals right there, and we are practically on top of each other when we're writing a report. And it's not far-fetched, it happens often where those 4 computers are taken, and then you're scrambling to find a different workstation within the department. Might be on a different floor, might be borrowing it from it in a different department. So this is overcrowded potentially here too, and this is the main throughway. So officers coming in at shift change are walking through there, and we have administration coming downstairs, walking through there, supervisors walking through there, and it's very distracting. This is our one workspace within the agency, and it's very distracting. I could have somebody trying to get a hold of a state's attorney on the phone right next to me while I'm trying to type up a DUI report, and there's conversations going on there. I'm a training officer. There's times where I'm mentoring an officer back at the station, but I'm trying to be quiet because someone else is on the phone or someone else is working on an important report. And so the amount of distractions there definitely is not the most efficient way that we could be doing this.
From a supervisor's perspective, they're right off the hallway that's used to go downstairs. So the change of roll call or shifts, we'll say, around 2:30, Officer Bechtold can be writing a report with another officer and constant flow of people walking by him. It becomes a social area. And it's not by his fault or anybody else's fault trying to do a report, but as the officers go downstairs for the next shift, high mark, high mark, high mark, and it's not a good work environment to get his work done. This is the supervisor's area. There's 8 workstations for the sergeants. It's about 25 by 15 feet in there. As you can see, it's jam-packed. We've used every inch of space. Now, there's nobody in this room. As you asked earlier about how does it look when people are in the room, this is how it looks. Now, there's only 3 supervisors there at this point. At a shift change, with afternoons being at fully staffed, they could have up to 4 supervisors working. There's 8 stations in there. There's actually 9 patrol supervisors, 9 patrol sergeants. There's only 8 stations. But at shift change, there'd be up to 4 supervisors working on afternoon shift with maybe 2 or 3 working on days. Now you have 7 people in there. And this area has become a communal area that there's a walkthrough constant with officers turning activity sheets in, maybe checking out a ticket book, et cetera. There's no privacy. They can't conduct mentoring sessions or counseling sessions with officers because there's no privacy for someone to walk right through, and they're constantly interrupted if they're on the phone, et cetera. This is an example of a commander's office that's right off of there. That's jam-packed. Now, Officer Bechtold mentioned that he's a training officer. I'm the coordinator of the training program, and we conduct weekly meetings with the officers that are in training. So it'll be myself, Sergeant Bonner, Officer Bechtold, and then the officer in training. So this is an example of the 4-person meeting we'll have in that room. And this is done, weekly, sometimes daily, depending on the situation with the person in training, and we barely have enough room to stand. Now, this is an example of the break room. In all fairness, it's it's in the position of being remodeled right now, so it's not really accurate, but it does look like this before. Hopefully down the road in a couple of months it'll look a little better, but that's where the officers would take a break, or records personnel. This is a storage room. We talk about repurposing. I've been there a long time, almost 30 years. This area right here used to be the gang room. And then it became a closet for winter coats. And then it became the rapid deployment. You can see those cubicles there for rapid deployment. Now, as an example, because we're so crammed for space, those shelves are scattered out throughout the whole department. So if everybody had to grab their gear, first off, I would remember where my gear is because I'm lucky enough to have a cubicle here. But of the officers, they have to remember where their gear is. and they have to get to their gear. And it's because it's spread out, because we're so crammed for space, it's an issue. Here you have,
If I could just say to that, my gear is, it's in a stairwell, that there's, one of our shifts is actually on a mid-level of a stairwell, and that's where our rapid deployment bags are. So if we need to get that in emergency, I need to run up the stairs, grab it out of that cubicle and go. So it's not very efficient.
yeah, we've repurposed and repurposed and repurposed. Deputy Fraternal spoke of a traffic officer. Originally, it was the conference room for the supervisor. It was really nice to have. We had a little area that people could eat lunch or conduct their conferences. We used to meet in there at the end of shift, so it was quiet, so we go over reports, so we're not distracted, so we can, accurately and work on the reports. Now that's a IT room. Before that, it was a traffic room. So we've repurposed these rooms over and over again. As an example, I said this was a gang room. Now we have some gun lockers, and we have rapid deployment and the coat rack for the supervisors.
So this is our above-ground parking lot. So many of you have seen this and perhaps visited the department. And if you notice, several of these vehicles are parked in unmarked parking spaces, and that's not by preference, but that's just the fact of the nature that there's not enough parking spaces up there. So officers, both in personal cars and in police vehicles, have to get creative on that parking deck to find spots where we can park our vehicles.
If I go back here just for a second, a little bit of story. Now, when the break of shift, 3 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, the officers are walking out to their cars. We have no secured parking. So the officer's walking out to the parking lot, and getting into his personal car in the same area where an offender could park, or, a witness or wherever. So they immediately know what kind of car the officer drives. And of course, with today's internet, you can find anybody on the internet. But why should the officer be exposed to that? It happens, and, you say, well, it's not going to happen. We've had officers that people have attempted to follow them home because they're in the same parking lot, they know where they're going to come through. They just wait for them on the street, and they see them pull out, and they try to follow them home. Now, luckily, in the example that I have, that officer noticed that and made a turnoff, but still, the parking's jam-packed there, and every space is used. It's either by someone who's filing a report, committed a crime, or someone who works in the building.
Yeah, and there's times where I've gone out to my car and I see, to my personal car, and I see the person that I arrested in the car next to me, and I'll go back in and I'll wait them out until they leave because I don't want them to know what vehicle I'm getting in. And also with the parking deck, because of all the faults and the cracks and everything in there, it's at the point now where heavy vehicles are not allowed on there. So we cannot bring an ambulance on there anymore because of the defects of the deck. And we just had this happen last week where we had an uncooperative subject who just had some mental issues, and we were trying to get him to go to the ambulance, and he was struggling with us. So we had to get him from the police booking area all the way out to the street where the ambulance was, as opposed to an ambulance being able to pull up just a few feet from the exit door where we could walk him directly out there. But we had to manage to get him, 50 yards or whatever out to the street to be able to get him into the ambulance. That's an officer safety issue, and that's an issue for the public too.
And some of us are lucky enough to have a parking spot in the underground garage, but you have to make the choice with your personal car because of the amount of damage we've had to department cars. Is it worth taking a chance to have your car damaged from falling concrete or, whatever is leaking at that point? This is a picture of the Sally Port. Mr. Lee showed this also. That's not a staged photo. That's really how it is. That's the storage. We have every inch used. In the Sally Port, we have to use that also for storage.
That's where we keep our salt, and we have our medical return drug turn-in box that goes in there too, so it really covers, it is like many personal garages. And this just goes to show the Sally Port is supposed to be able to get 2 vehicles in there. And as we can see, 2 vehicles in there is a real tight fit the way it is right now. And we can even go further to see. So that, imagine trying to get an arrestee out of the back of a vehicle when I can't even open the door all the way. And this is not like a rare thing where we have 2 squads within the Sally Port. It happens quite frequently, whether it be the follow car that Mr. Lee was talking about, or whether it have multiple offenders that you're transporting separately in there. And trying to deal with an arrestee, someone that might be under the influence, someone that might not like the police, that might want to fight with the police. This is obviously a safety issue as we try and manage getting subjects out of these vehicles. And then also there's, look at what the subject, you get him out of the vehicle, look what he or she would have access to with all those different bottles and foreign objects there. So once they get through the Sally Port, we bring them into the booking area, and this is where we would take a defendant and bring them in and go through the processing section for an arrest. The way it's set up, it's very tight with a lot of the heavy objects, whether it be the bench, the overweighted chairs and that, and we do bring, you can see that white line on the ground, that's for if you have intoxicated subjects, that maybe that's the inclement weather, you cannot run them through field sobriety tests out on the scene, so you bring them in there to do it. And an intoxicated subject, I'm sure you've seen enough of them either on YouTube or in your personal life that they're not very stable. If someone falls there, the proximity to that metal bench or those weighted chairs or the metal counter, or if someone decides to fight with the police, and we've had to try and restrain people, a lot of potential for injury because of that enclosed space with all the heavy objects.
Now, being here so long with the village and the department, we've actually had people be resistant and become injured because of the close proximity of everything in that room.
So this is one of our officers that's processing a subject, and, I mean, it should be obvious to anyone that is not the ideal situation when you have an arrestee sitting behind you. We do have, you can see the mirror overhead, but then you're focused on entering a report, then you're looking up at the mirror, and how quick would it take for that subject, if you wanted to do something against that officer, to just jump out of the bench and attack an officer, get the taser, or do whatever? It's obviously inefficient, and it's an officer safety issue to be turning your back to a subject at all times. All right, so you're revisiting the upstairs parking deck, and see some of the other issues. Again, the abundance of parking, you go in there at shift change, and you have 2 shifts that are trying to park in there, and there's just definitely not ample parking. And part of this, too, is not just ample parking for the officers. Because, yes, we can park on the street, we can park in the village parking lot, there's things that we do to make it work. But the problem is for the public. The public comes in here, and they have nowhere to park. And so they're looking for places to park, and then they get worried because there's a 2-hour time limit on the street, and they're concerned if they're allowed to park there, if they can go to a train lot, or if they can park across the street where there's a sign that says it's not a municipal lot. And so the public oftentimes is circling around trying to figure out where they can park.
That's 200 East Evergreen where it has that sign, because so many people go over there and utilize that parking lot because there's no parking available at the police department. Obviously, you're well aware of the repairs that have been conducted there over the years. Being here for the whole time that the police department's been there, it seems like every couple of years they're tearing it off and resealing it. This is some pictures of the gutter system in the underground garage. I like my 2009 Honda, but I'm sometimes reluctant to park it underneath that. On Wednesdays, one of the duties of the community service officers are to check the cars and to use a cleaning substance just to clean off anything that might have fallen on it to protect the village property. There's some of the concrete dust that's fallen. Some investigators will go as far as putting a tarp on their car. I know that one investigator that parks his personal car down there has his own tarp because he's worried about it being damaged.
Well, thank the board for giving us a few minutes today. I'm Commander McGuffin. I'll talk a little bit about the record section first. This is Gia, and she is in actually a storage closet, and she's working with the microfilm. You see she's got a shredder next to her, and you'll notice the tarps in the back. There's a leak from the ventilation system. We store old tickets in there, also some compliance tickets. And we had to put this in there to make sure that there's no leakage. You notice the bucket up there will catch the water for us, so it won't leak on anything. Next photo. Keep going. This here is the hallway going into records. You'll notice there is some file cabinets sitting there. That's the hallway in there. So there's no room in there for file cabinets, so we actually use this hallway. So if you're walking down this hallway into records, you'll notice that there's no space to get around. You see Mary, our record supervisor, is basically just filing some tickets in the storage area, and there's no room. The copier sits right in the middle of the record section. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is a big deal, because many times they're answering FOIAs, they're answering subpoenas. It's very loud. It's run constantly because there's always copies being made, and it's distracting for the records personnel. The training section. The training room you see here is designed, probably can take no more than 24 people. And as Mr. Ray Lee said, most training, they want around 40 people, so we can have off-site training in our facility. Ours, at the most, is 24. This here is Glendale Heights, to show you what kind of training facility they have. This is our facility again, very limited. And it's also, you notice that wall in the back, that was recently done because we were running out of space for crime prevention and crime-free housing. So we made this additional office in back, which even limited our space in that training area more. So there's an office back there. We had that space before, but we lost that about a year ago to accommodate for additional space. New Lenox, their training department. Defensive tactics. It's imperative that we do constant training in handcuffing, defensive tactics, tasers, ASS. We also do some type of ground fighting, but because of the limited availability of this room and the safety hazards you'll see in this room, like there's some TVs on the wall, there's a lector up the front, it's very difficult to do that. And also we got to set the mats up, and also we got to find time because the fire department uses this room too. And it's hard to reserve time in there for the training. But it's imperative that we have that ability to do this and have like a tactical training area for us to be used. This is an agency, Lafayette Police Department, their tactical training area. This is where we store everything. There's a storage room just adjoining to that. We shove everything there. The training department we share the storage with crime prevention, so they also use that room to store particular items in there too. Next one, Scott. All right.
Hello, I'm Dave Zabora. I'm the investigative commander, and with me today is Investigator Mike Angarola. We're going to talk a little bit about the space needs issues that we have in our investigative unit. First off, this is the main floor where most of the personnel work. Currently, when we're at full staff, we have 14 people that work in investigations, along with our police social worker who's been recently assigned to work in that space as well. We have 2 supervisor offices, 8 cubicles, and a separate common workstation, and we've converted the old receptionist area into a workspace to accommodate all of us. And even with all that done, when we're at full staff, we're still 1 space short. So not only does it provide for a cramped space when we're overlapping for 4 hours a day, everybody's there. It makes it very difficult when we have visitors. And the type of visitors that we have in investigations are other investigators from other agencies. We're working similar cases. We have to find spaces for them to work. A lot of occasions we have assistant state's attorneys helping us to approve charges. We have no place for them to work. They have to commandeer somebody's cubicle or another space where we have to move stuff so they're able to work. This makes it very difficult. In addition, the patrolmen, they have their space downstairs. You saw Officer Bechtold showing their work area. When they're working with us on multiple occasions, we work together. They have nowhere to go. So we have to, again, make room. So this causes us to be very cramped, and it's very inefficient working. And so that's the current situation. There really is no room for future expansion. So we're just trying to get by currently, and we can't even think about the future if there is, any addition to our unit. Our special investigations unit, that's our narcotics unit. When that's full staff, 3 people work in this area. They also have a lot of situations where they work with other agencies who do similar work, and that's on the floor. So if they're inviting some of their guys over, they're having discussions. Investigator Angarola is going to get into some of the sound issues and some of the issues that where people are talking, and it's resonating throughout the entire unit. This is a space I talked about. We recently had the police social worker assigned to investigation. She needed a spot. We offered up our old reception area because we don't have a receptionist anymore. So this is the area that she uses several days a week to come in and hold her hours. The window right there, that's out to the public. It used to be a reception area. People would come and talk to the receptionist and be able to do that. They still show up at the window. They think she's the receptionist. So there's a lot of times where she's interrupted because the public thinks that that's the person who they should be speaking to. And that's the only place we can put her. Ray Lee talked recently before about technology. This is our technology space, and it's very limited. It's the last space we have in investigations, minus the interview rooms. We have certain things such as a portable fingerprint machine. We have people that have to come in and get fingerprinted, police applicants, people that are applying for jobs with the village. We do all our property inventory investigations at this location. We have camera equipment here. We have a special computer used to view videos, which we're doing all the time. In addition, we're assigned as part of the Internet Crimes Against Children. We have a couple of our investigators that are part of that task force. They have a specific assigned computer, and it needs its own interface. We don't have enough interfaces. We have to unplug stuff and plug stuff in to be able to use it, and that needs to be secure, and we really don't have a secure area to do it. We have to commandeer one of our 2 interview rooms to do that when we want to get involved with that kind of stuff. So again, it makes for a lot of inefficiency. A lot of times, this is where the state's attorney sits, and they have to spread out and do their work here. And as you can see, it's not very conducive to that type of work. A lot of patrolmen work in this workspace because we have no other place to put them when we're fully staffed. You've seen the picture of this before. This is our conference room. As I mentioned, when we're fully staffed, we have 14 members. There's maybe a chance to put 10 chairs around that table, and the rest of the people have to stand. You see the whiteboard that says major cases. Sometimes we have operations we're conducting. We're inviting patrolmen up. We're inviting other agency members, other agencies and their members to participate with us. We're doing diagrams on that board. We have sometimes 10, 12, 15 people in this room. It doesn't work. And the space is not big enough. So sometimes we're forced to go to other conference rooms in the police department if they're available. And we've got to make appointments to get them sometimes. And this room also doubles as the investigative break room. So I'm going to turn this over to Investigator Angarola. He's going to get into some of the issues that we have and some of the day-to-day operations that our investigators have to deal with on a constant basis.
Good evening. So obviously in investigations, we're dealing with the most high-profile, complex cases, most violent cases, most important cases to our community, to our village, and it's really essential that our building space assists us in that. And we found a number of challenges to doing our investigations properly and efficiently. And one of the biggest challenges that we found is through sound. And I'd like to use the phrase sound security. We just lack it. This is a good example in this photo of where we have challenges, where we have one of our interview rooms, as you can see off to the right, is sharing a drywall with our break room. So the sound just carries over and conversations can be heard. They're barely muffled at all. It's crystal clear from one room to the next. So when we have an offender, we have victims, witnesses, we're always cognizant of the fact that we can't use that break room during that time if we don't want conversations to carry over back and forth. Doing a proper investigation, obviously we have to have parties separated. We can't have conversations bleeding one room to the other. We need when there's multiple witnesses, to maintain the integrity of the investigation, we have to have one witness's pure statement unencumbered or uninfluenced by the statement of another, or to have an offender hear what we're talking about with the witnesses, or to have the offender potentially hear what we're talking about with each other when we're gathering all the information together. Just to illustrate this point, one of the examples that I experienced was when I had an offender in that very room, and he was potentially going to be charged with a felony, and our protocol is we call the state's attorney's office to review the facts of the case with them to see if they're willing to proceed on the felony charge before we can charge them with that felony. So while he was waiting in that room, I was in the middle of, my cubicle's in the middle of that space, approximately, the workspace that you saw in the prior photos. So I'm quite a distance away from that room, and I'm on the phone with the state's attorney. No raised voices or anything, just speaking normally, relaying the facts of the case. Unfortunately, at that time, the state's attorney elected not to charge that individual with the felony, which was good news to him. When I came into that room, he had a big smile on his face, which is not a usual look from an offender in custody. And when I walked in, I said, "Well, I have good news for you." And he said, "I already know. I heard everything you just said to the state's attorney. I'm so relieved." So that's not the kind of thing, in that case, it didn't cause any adverse reactions other than he found out a minute early. But my entire conversation with the state's attorney, unfortunately, was my end of it anyway. He was able to hear the whole thing. So this really illustrates that our conversations all throughout the space are potentially overheard, and that can affect us immensely. And it causes us to have to be wary of that and to avoid using certain rooms and spaces when we have offenders and victims. It also becomes an issue with our audio recordings. More and more the laws mandating audio video recordings of interrogations on major crimes, and all photo lineups have to be audio video recorded unless the person being administered the lineup refuses. So typically the preference by law is to audio video record. So we're limited to these two rooms, these two interview rooms, in doing that, and the space is not adequate for that. And again, we have audio video recording that now we have to be extra cautious of what sounds are traveling through the space, because all of it is subject to being picked up by the microphone. This gets into the safety concerns also of our space. This is actually one of our interview rooms, and I don't think you need to be a police officer to see the issues with this ceiling tile here. The potentiality for contraband to be stored up there, or even a possible escape attempt. A person could potentially get up there and try and flee custody. So that's a major concern of ours as far as safety with the interview rooms. Our bathrooms are a concern too, particularly safety-wise. That is one of the bathrooms there, the women's bathroom. The men's bathroom is off view to the left, and that's the other interview room to the right. Those are the only two bathrooms for our entire space. That means that's the same bathrooms that we, the employees, use. That's the same bathrooms that our guests use, the same bathrooms that our victims use, the same bathrooms that our offenders use when they have to use the facilities. And our main concern with that, of course, is obviously these bathrooms have to, if they're for our use and our guests' use, they have to be able to be locked from the inside. But when we have somebody in custody, now we have concern for safety of allowing them into a bathroom that they can lock themselves in. And you can see the door handle here, there's no key. So if potentially an offender locked himself in there and wouldn't open up, we'd have no other alternative but to break the door open. It's just not adequate. It's not acceptable. And then our other major safety concern is the walk from custody down to the lockup area. So you saw the photos earlier of our booking area, our lockup area. So we're on the second floor investigation. So once we're done with our investigation, they're ready to be processed down in our booking area and to be transferred into a cell to await bond hearing. they are walked through this path. This is the door straight on at the other end of the photo there. That leads to our investigative area, so they would walk down the hall. We would be walking them right through 2 doors into the stairwell. As you can imagine, this is not ideal for us to walk offenders, especially after they've known they've been charged or facing prison time potentially. This is not an ideal scenario to be walking them down this stairwell if it can all be avoided. This is obviously hazardous if they decide to fight or attempt to flee. Additionally, as we go down these stairs, to the left would be leading towards our lockup area through another door. And to the right is a door immediate outside. There's no encumbrance to just out that door. Now, obviously, we're escorting these prisoners down, but the potentiality is still there for an escape attempt, especially for a repeat offender that might be unfortunately very familiar with the interior of our building. And where does this exterior building, the exterior door lead to if you're not familiar with the area? Obviously, for the public, if you're not familiar, it leads right onto Northwest Highway, and there's our train station. So we obviously would be in a very bad scenario if it led to something like that, but our building should be assisting us in avoiding these, not things we have to constantly work around and protect against and be on guard with. It just diminishes our efficiency, increases our manpower, and I think the most important, I didn't want to rehash it too much, but Trustee Zedell raised the excellent point of the design of the building where it's so cramped and small, we're constantly on guard and maintaining separation from our victims and our offenders, our victims' families and our offenders' families. And it's a logistical nightmare at times, especially in a complex investigation. It's something we're very aware of because of the deficiencies in our building design that we constantly have to dedicate resources to.
Yeah, and there's been multiple occasions where we've had multiple offenders, victims, witnesses, and we've had to pull patrolmen off the street to assist us to sit with people down in the interview rooms downstairs, because you have to have someone watching the offenders or suspects, whatever you want to call them at that time. And then while the investigators are working with the offenders upstairs and witnesses and victims. So he said it becomes a logistical nightmare, and it ends up pulling sometimes officers off the street to help us do that, because it's the only way we can do it at that time. So anyway, that's the investigative portion. We're going to turn this over to the evidence portion. I believe Commander Garris will be doing that.
All right, good evening. How are you, Board? My name is Commander Joe Garris. Wait for applause to subside. I'm here to talk about the evidence technician. As you saw earlier, the officers were leaving roll call. They had a lot of equipment with them. They're going out to their cars. Well, the evidence technicians have additional property that they have to carry with them as well. Some of it's very bulky, there's cameras and things of that nature. There are evidence technician vehicles that have dedicated equipment inside it, but some of it can't be left outside. You know, batteries go bad, things of that nature. So, and officers like to have their own personal equipment because then they know it's been refilled properly and everything else. So if you see in the picture, there's this evidence equipment that they do use. Now, there are 10 evidence technicians, and we have 11 lockers. Now, these lockers currently aren't really sufficient to hold the equipment that they do have, due to the size of the equipment and everything else. There's also, in the 11th one, we have a traffic crash unit, and that unit also shares a locker as well. There's a little cross-training between some of the evidence technicians and the crash unit, but there is a dedicated locker for them as well. And you can see it's pretty crowded in that room. The picture you're looking at now is a processing area for evidence. A lot of times if they're on a scene, say a burglary, a resident in town, we'll take property back to the station to process. You know, fingerprint powder being very messy, and it can really do some damage to a home. We take it here and we can process it in this area. I don't know if this picture really does it justice, but this is a small room. Maybe we get 1 or 2 evidence technicians in there working at one time, and they're working on a case. it's kind of cramped. We can move that typewriter out of the way and everything else, but it's really kind of tight in there. In contrast, an agency that has been done, this is a processing room at New Lenox. As you can see, in our scenario, we have a desk against the wall that you're working on. Here you have a 360-degree area where you can work, process on evidence. Much more advantageous to the evidence technicians that are working a case. You know, occasionally evidence technicians, when they bring things in, we talked about earlier, the building was built in '93, and a lot of things that were not common then are very common now. DNA evidence being one of them, biological evidence is a concern. So you want to have a nice, clean environment where you can work on this equipment or on this evidence. So you've got to do your processing, packaging, and storage in this area. Like I said, sometimes they use some ugly, nasty scenes that they go to. I don't know if you notice a little bit often, they also have a coffee pot there. So it's just such a cramped area. It's really not, I'll say it this way. We have some really highly professional evidence technicians. They do a fantastic job. But their performance is being hindered by what we're allowing for them. So I think our people would be very, another picture. In this one, you can see on the other side, I talked about biological evidence. There's a drying cabinet. If something comes in with blood or something on it, it has to be dried before it can be processed. We don't put wet evidence into evidence because then it would just mold and then there would be other issues. You have a driving cabinet. Next to that, we have a fuming room. You've probably seen that in movies where they fume it with super glue, and it brings out fingerprints and things on different items of evidential value. In the corner, I don't know if the next picture shows it, but yeah, there's a deep sink and an eye wash area, things of that nature. So, and then you can see that we also store equipment on the back shelf. So again, as many of the other people have spoken to you, we're utilizing areas for two different purposes. This is another area in the evidence room that has been reused. This used to be a secure area for evidence processing. In '93, we didn't anticipate having a lot of things that we have today, such as tasers. We have to store them somewhere where officers have access to it. So we've opened up this room so officers can go in there and sign out tasers on a daily basis. This area is also where we do a lot of the additional processing and/or packaging of evidence. And across, this is the other side of the room, you can see that the tasers are stored there along with packaging material for any kind of evidence that we might bring in. A lot of evidence, we have problems with vehicles. We have a vehicle that has to be processed, and we have a single garage for that purpose. Again, we're using it for other storage areas. This is a specialty vehicle for the evidence unit. It's parked there because we don't have room for it anywhere else in the garage. So it's parked there on a normal basis. If we bring the vehicle down, we park it in the garage, but we have to, if you see on the lower right, there's the back end of a vehicle, that's a parking spot. There's another parking spot in front of that. So potentially you would have to move 3 vehicles before we could put in a vehicle that has to be processed. There's also, with that, that garage is in the underground garage. It's difficult for vehicles to get down there occasionally with, depending on what kind of tow truck you're using, and there's not a lot of room to get downstairs. So essentially, we just have run out of room in the evidence area. All right, I think next I'm turning it over to Officer Philip.
Good evening. My name is Officer Scott Philipek. I'm with the Technical Services Unit with the Police Department. Part of my job is a liaison between the information technology of the village and the Police Department and how we can utilize, to the best of our ability, the resources that are out there for the Police Department working with the village. The early 90s when this building was built was an exciting time for computers. People were finding that every computer or every desktop had a computer on it. But mainly what they found were that this was just for word processing and these computers were isolated just to that desktop. As the 90s progressed and the internet became more popular and networking became the standard for computing, computers needed to be able to communicate with one another, and the police department needed to adapt to that capability as well. What we see here is what the computer did to meet the needs of the networking. This is the entrance to the server room for the police department. It is housed through the locker room for the administrative section upstairs, but you have to cross the attic access to get to it. It is less than ideal because it's not a totally secured area. Although the door is locked, this attic is accessed by Public Works. It is accessed by general contractors working on the building upstairs, and people who are escorted through the building to get work done that needs maintenance on the building itself. The server room itself, as you can see, is not quite as robust as most police departments have these days. This room was retrofitted. It was an old lunchroom that was kind of outfitted as the server room. So they gave up the lunchroom to house the servers that the police department needed. It is less than ideal, as I mentioned, because the cooling system to keep these servers at a good temperature is less than adequate. Fans during the summertime are needed to keep the air circulating throughout the room, because the air conditioner that is used here is on the wall. As you can see below the air conditioner, there's a hole where there's a fan. Next door to that room is a separate room that was the old telephone room. And that was housed when the telephone needed the infrastructure for the phone systems. That fan right there is blowing the air between the two rooms. This is the telephone room. As you can see, it's quite cramped. It doesn't have a lot of space. This room houses our MVR mobile video recorders and our digital video recorders. And as you've heard in the news lately, video for officers is something that's increasing. Since I've been on the police department 11 years, we've always had in-car videos, and those have been uploaded to these servers. The trend now is body cameras, and that's something that we need to be prepared for. Is it something that's happening in the next 5 years, 10 years? We don't know, but we need something that can certainly house that, because it needs to be retained for at least 90 days. So that information has to be collected and then stored and retained. Another thing is our radio system. This is the back of the roll call room, what you saw that was crowded, to say the least, in the beginning of a shift. These chargers do make a humming noise, which is overwhelming when a supervisor is trying to convey information vital for that shift, and things that could be very important for that officer to hear. This humming in the back room is something that is distracting while the officers are trying to get ready for their upcoming shift. This is an exciting time for police, just like the early 90s was when the computer was on everyone's desk. I'm excited because we have the ability to do a lot of things with the information and the technology that's out there, be it cell phones. You know, the iPhone is, like Mr. Lee said, is 10 years old. I was in the high school for 6 years, and I found in the 6 years from the day one till I left, the amount of information that is shared with cellular telephones, with iPads, with every other technological device. Kids aren't passing notes anymore. Adults aren't writing letters anymore. They're using their electronic devices. As the police, we need to be able to utilize that information in our investigations. Cybercrime is coming, and we need to be prepared. Like Commander Zaboral said, this is our investigative section where we do computer crimes. A lot of these, cell phone analysis, crime analytics, computer forensics need dedicated interfaces to be evidentiary. So what that means is they need their own rooms, they need their own devices, and they need to be dedicated to extract the information, retain the information, and have that chain of custody to where we can say that, yes, this information is pure. So The space that we have here isn't adequate for us to do that. So what we have to do is send it out to other agencies, whether that be a neighboring agency that has the capability or, a computer forensics laboratory where they can take it, put us on a list, and in so much time, they'll get back to us and give us our information where our case could be, at that point, cold. So the needs that we need to move forward and to do our own analysis and analytics is I think, should be at the forefront to our concern, is that technology is crucial here. We're going to move on to the Armory stage of it, and that's.
First picture here is of the Armory. Several times throughout the year, a semi will pull up in front of the station, and we'll have to unload maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pounds of ammunition, as you'll see in this room here. And it comes to the station because there's not room for it at the range. After it's unloaded from the truck, it's brought downstairs. This is downstairs in the roll call room. It's locked up in there. As our supplies diminish at the range, it's taken out of here and transferred again, several thousand pounds, back down to the range, back down to the basement. Just a little bit about that.
One of my duties at the police department is also to oversee crime-free housing and crime prevention. Many of you have been through the Citizens Police Academy, and you're all familiar with Greg Sill. He does a great job for the police department. He's often the face of the police department. Greg Sill, in the last 18 months, was repurposed to a different office because we had to make space upstairs in the administrative area. I don't want to describe the area that I had occupied at one point as cozy, but it was myself, a sergeant, and a civilian who occupied one office. So every time that I would have to have a meeting with a subordinate, or as I spoke, I was in charge of the training program, a mentoring session or counseling session with someone in training, I would have to excuse those other two people because the conversation was to be private. So at some point, it was decided to use part of the training room, and Public Works was nice enough to construct a wall, and Greg Sill and Pat Lyons were moved downstairs to the new office, as you see. The door's closed because it's part of the lobby. It's a secure area, or should be, so they leave the door closed. They have a little ring doorbell there so they can see anybody coming up, but they have to keep the door closed. We talk a lot about technology, but the important is the community. And we interact with the community, and Greg and Pat Lyons do a lot of the interacting with the community. This is where the community interacts with Greg Sill and Pat Lyons. Obviously, it's cramped like any other space that you've seen that we've shown you. It's not the best work environment. There's Greg there. Greg has to use the same area for staging for some of the events that he has for the police department in the village. He utilizes his office. He utilizes another storage area off of the training room, and then another closet throughout the police department. So potentially Greg could be sitting there with a citizen and have to excuse himself, leave the citizen. He has to make a choice. If you leave them in the secure area, tell them to please leave the area and then lock the door to go get some equipment he might need because he doesn't know what he's going to need at the point of the first interaction with the citizen. So obviously not the best environment for Greg or Pat Lyons, but this is what the community is going to see. This is what a citizen is going to see who wants to talk to Greg about crime prevention or anything else. Another thing for Greg, as many of you, like I said, have been through the Citizens Police Academy, it's limited. Our training is limited to how many people we can have in the Citizens Police Academy, or if we host crime prevention events based on the training area that we have. So Greg can't do that. Greg also acts as the public information officer for the police department. Greg and I write the press releases, and then we turn them over through the process through other people in the agency. As the public information officer, what if Greg had to have a press conference? Where would Greg have it? Certainly not in that office, and certainly not at that couch where Pat Lyons with crime-free housing would also talk to somebody in the community about the crime-free housing program.
Good evening. Deputy Chief Tim Griffin, and I'm going to close this up for staff tonight and just talk a little bit about the employee experience of working in the facility, and then just wrap up with a few items on some of the maintenance that's been spent in recent years on the building and some of the future plans for the building, just to kind of put that out on the table as to what are some of the things that have, with the existing building, are needed to continue with it. But throughout this presentation, you've seen the many compartmentalized spaces of the facility of the police department. And the working environment of the facility often hinders our collaboration, our communication, and unfortunately, even the morale of the staff. Morale is a key component in an organization to be effective, and communication is key in any organization to be effective. And no matter what type of work you're in, if communication is very, very poor, then sometimes morale is also going to be very poor. Unfortunately, as much as we try to communicate very well, that our own facility hinders our interactions with one another and the way we collaborate with one another in that building. I wanted to just talk, when we talk about the employee experience, to think about the officers every day when they come to work and kind of the experience of coming through the process of starting their day. So we have, and I'm very proud to have spent 20 years with the police department in Mount Prospect, because I work with some of the finest officers that I've ever met, and we do some of the best customer service for this community that I think any police department does. And that is something I just hold with the greatest feeling of pride about this department. But when we send the officers in every day, they start their day in this fairly cramped, crowded roll call room where they're with their peers and they get their briefing. And that's kind of the pep talk of the day, so to speak. This is where we all get energized for the day to go out and serve the community. And we're kind of starting in a limited, tight space right off the get-go. And then our next move is from the roll call room, the patrol officers then go into the parking garage. I know you've already seen this slide before, but what I wanted to talk about with this slide was just think about the garage of itself. You've seen the stains on the cars and the liquids that come down. But think about just from the kind of the dark, gloomy atmosphere of this environment. This is really where we start our officers to go out and serve for the day. And it's really not the most ideal for that purpose. One last thing about the squads that I want to mention. Some of the other people that have spoken tonight talked a little bit about the lime and the rust that comes down on the cars. And Commander Smith talked about how on Wednesdays we rally some people around to try to clean that up and get the cars clean because we really want to protect the village's assets. And our officers take great pride in their squad cars. And we have a beautiful fleet of squad cars in Mount Prospect. And from an officer's perspective, their squad car is their office. And so they want it to look nice when they go out every day. So although we do that on a weekly basis, many of the officers will do that every time when they come to work. If they see a stain on their car or something on the car when they go to take it out, they're going to do that. They're going to clean it up. And that process involves taking like a CLR type chemical and putting it on the paint to scrub that rust or that lime off of it. And then once you have applied that type of chemical to the car, you have to rush it over to the car wash right away because we can't have that chemical sitting on the paint and the clear coat of the car. So it's the only thing, the car wash in of itself won't clear those stains off. We have to use some type of alternative chemical. But once we do, we immediately have to get the car washed to get that chemical off of it as well. Our officers do that. They do it very often. They do it with a good attitude, as annoying as it is. But I think that if you think about how much time is spent on that and kind of the morale kick that is, that they do it on such a frequent basis, and how much better their time could be spent doing service needs for the community rather than that, it's really something to think about with the condition of the garage and the lime and the rust down there. We've talked a little bit tonight about 21st century policing and how policing has changed over the last several decades. We in Mount Prospect, I believe, are really on the forefront of a lot of the 21st century policing concepts, one of which is within community engagement. So as many of you know, in 2017, we rolled out a new performance model that we refer to as an outcome-based performance model for the officers and for the department as a whole. And with that model, really stresses community engagement. And when you talk about 21st century policing, really community engagement and partnerships with the community is extremely important. So with this model, we've set goals for the officers, goals about reducing crime. We've put all the officers in permanent beats. We've set goals for them to reduce crime in those beats, to reduce traffic crashes in those beats. But we've also set goals for them to engage the community through a variety of community engagement forums. Many of you have had the opportunity to attend some of the department's community engagement programs. We try to be very innovative with those things and do a lot of different things out in the community. But with that said, the one major limitation we have is when we want to engage the community in our own facility. And that's where we oftentimes become very limited. And so I start here with just the lobby. It's neat and clean, but it is a tight lobby. If you wanted to hold a large meeting at the station, maybe a beat meeting, where we wanted to get a lot of community residents in to come and talk in our training room, we would be kind of gathered in this very tight space to start. This is where it would go. And then from there, as kind of an example, here's a newer police facility out in Bentonville. You kind of see it just a lot more spacious. The chairs are against the walls opposed to in the middle. Can definitely accommodate more people. And then from there, if we want to hold a community meeting, we are limited. We are limited to the space that's available in this room. It's not the most eye-appealing facility out there at this point, and it definitely stifles how many people we could invite if we wanted to have an open community meeting, a beat meeting, and bring people in to talk about any issues present in the community. Just as another example, here's a more modern facility. This is a community room out in Hoffman Estates. As you can see, just a lot more space and a lot more opportunity to have a large gathering of residents. And then just we're talking about the employee experience of working in the facility. I wanted to just talk a little bit about even just something as simple as lunch and where people eat when they're in that building, because they come to work for an 8-hour day. And when the building was designed, this was intended to be the lunchroom. This was intended for, we don't obviously have all 105 employees in the building at the same time, but this is the lunchroom for the building. Now, most people, I don't think anybody eats there, to be quite honest with you. They find other places to eat because it's really not that inviting, and it's just in a hallway. It's just in a hallway. But with that, we only have a few places to eat in the building. You saw the one area that's under renovation right now. Public Works is currently working on that. But that's very limited in space. The investigators have the break room up in their area. And then the only true conference room that we have in the building is the one in the administrative section. And unfortunately, some people want to eat lunch in there too, and it sometimes conflicts with meetings or other things that are scheduled. So even as something as simple as just having lunch sometimes becomes complicated in our building as to where you're going to do it, because there's not very many places. And what it's come down to is we're finding that a lot of staff is actually going out to their personal cars and eating lunch in their car and then coming back in 20, 30 minutes. And so that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate that we've kind of gotten to that point. I just wanted to kind of bring it to your attention. Again, this is the lunchroom in investigations. So all in all, from an organizational perspective, the current police facility is less than ideal for our staff and their employee experience, their expectations. Again, we have a phenomenal staff. We invest a lot in our community engagement programs and a lot in our professional development of our staff. But again, our own facility prohibits us sometimes from doing the things that we want to do and the type of trainings and the things that we want to do. Looking just at some of the maintenance work that's been done on the facility, just going back to 2007, you see that there has been some investments made, a total of $1.3 million, a little almost $1.4 million. We have carpet, roofs and gutters, the UPS replacement in 2007, the men's locker room, the HVAC replacement, the women's locker room, and the garage ramp replacement was done back in 2011. So there has been a lot of work done over the years. A lot of various projects have been done over the years, but we still really struggle with the space as it is today. And in some of the future maintenance work that is planned, you see the parking deck repair for resurfacing is scheduled for next year at a cost of $623,000. So that's obviously the largest expense in maintaining the current building. We need to replace the sprinkler system, the sprinkler piping in the garage for $105,000 in 2009. Refurbish the fire police training room in 2019 at a cost of $88,000. The windows are in need to be replaced in 2019 at a cost of $230,000. The fire station apparatus floor resealing at a cost of $75,000. And the bathroom remodeling at a cost of $105,000. The planter bed removal and replacement, $255,000 in the front, which is where a lot of the water that leaks into the basement ultimately comes from. And the tuck pointing at $100,000. So you could see there's just a little over 1.5, almost $1.6 million planned in future maintenance work as it is today on the building just for the structure itself. With that, I want to open it up for questions. We have all the staff here, as well as Acting Chief Eternal is going to come up and we'll be able to handle any questions that you may have about any of the things that we talked about tonight. I know we definitely talked about a wide variety of topics, and I'm sure there's a wide variety of questions.
Well, thank you. I think it was important for us to get the full picture. So this was a long presentation, but I think necessary because we're talking about a whole building and the entirety of the police process that goes on. So let's go for questions first. Trustee Grossi.
The mayor had talked about this, evidence storage and record storage, possibly going off-site. Are there any legal ramifications for doing that? Does it have to be a secured location? And does there have to be something for chain of command or chain of custody on some of this stuff? That's the first question. And then the servers, the community service officer and the crime-free housing, they all seem that they may be able to be put in a separate area because you're not really dealing with some of the, other issues, and they may take up a little bit of room. I'm just trying to think outside the box. It makes sense to have them all in one spot, but if we had to do something that we couldn't give you everything, are these the areas we'd be looking at?
Starting with your first question regarding evidence and off-site storage, it's not uncommon, as it was alluded to earlier, there are certain laws that dictate how long we must maintain evidence. In the case of a homicide, that's indefinitely. And it sounds silly, but whatever evidence comes out of that homicide, whether it be a couch, whether it be a door, whether it be a carpet, all that has to be maintained indefinitely. So there are a lot of agencies who've had experienced this, and they've had to find off-site locations. And it does have to be secured, obviously for chain of custody, but no, it has happened. It's not an ideal situation, but it is feasible that it could happen. I mean, you could realistically encounter a vehicle that you have to seize as a result of a homicide, and these are large-scale items that you have to house essentially forever. In regards to your question about the crime prevention officer?
Well, there was also record storage. Would that be the same issue? Because you're just all the other storage for evidence, and I would assume record storage is different.
As far as electronic or the actual papers?
Actual papers, and chain of custody and things like that. If it's just personnel files or things like that, can they go to an off-site location also? And how much does that take up out of your space right now?
The two parts of that. First, the state has a state disposal order, which we follow. For certain types of paperwork, it's dictated when we'll eliminate that. Sometimes we try and put it on electronically, scan it in, but unfortunately, we have to store the paperwork. In fact, in the basement of Village Hall, we have about 40 boxes, banker's boxes full of papers waiting for destruction because we don't have the facilities at the police department.
And so the other ones were, could the servers be off-site, or do they have to be totally secured?
No, servers can be off-site. In fact, Northwest Central Dispatch uses that. They have servers because, as we know, in this day and age, you want to prepare for a worst-case scenario. And it's not a good idea to have servers at one location if it's containing valuable information. So sometimes having a backup at a remote facility is extremely valuable.
Okay, and then the other two were the community service officer and the crime-free housing. Could they technically go off-site, or would you want them in the same building as the rest of the department?
I think, as we alluded to earlier, I mean, for communication purposes, it's always essential to have them there. Worst-case scenario, yes, you could remove them, but again, once you start picking people away from the department and relocating them, it causes difficulty with communication. And Greg is very intricate, like as Vander Smith alluded to, he does our press PIO. He does press releases, so having him off location, not that we can't do that by phone and electronic means, it's always helpful sometimes to be able to sit down and brainstorm how you want to address a press release. And he could always come back here, but again, it does cause potential problems if we do relocate him.
And then one final question from me. Would you prefer a building all on one floor? Is that what I'm getting out of this, that going up and down stairs with victims or accused persons or whatever, you want to keep them all on, like, as close as possible and, not go up and down stairs and...
I'm not sure if Ray would like that. I mean, I know in a perfect world, I think sometimes having one story is helpful, but when you get to the square footage, I think it's unrealistic too.
Some of the best stations we've designed are on one level.
Around one level.
But let's get to practicality. Not everyone has sites that are big enough to spread a big building out. So there are certain elements that you want to keep together. For example, like patrol, investigations, lockup. There's some synergies there. They can share interview rooms. They have great communication. They both use the lockup. And so those type of spaces, you don't have to then carry prisoners up and down stairs and things like that.
Okay.
So those type of things tend to want to be on the first floor. But think about the function of a police department. Those are also some of the biggest divisions in the police department. So your first floor footprint tends to want to be bigger than like any other floor.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
hopefully that answers your question.
So, it does. I have nothing else at this point.
Other questions? Let's go to trustee Zadell.
Does anybody remember Barney Miller?
Yes, I do.
Boy, did some of those pictures bring back memories of a very funny TV show. Anyway, I really appreciate the in-depth perception that you have brought to this meeting. Yes, it was a long meeting perhaps, but I think it was definitely necessary. Some of the things I clearly remembered, but other things are day-to-day operational things that I would never experience, but you brought them to life, and I greatly appreciate that. And I think it makes everything clearer as to not only what your needs are, but how inadequate the facility that you're in now appears to be. Everything is double duty. And with regard to trying to find an off-site area for some of the functions, I got the feeling from your presentation that there's a lot of interaction that goes on. You know, it's not an upstairs, downstairs thing. There has to be face-to-face type of communication for all of the things that have been mentioned. Besides, there probably is an expense to off-site storage as well, especially for things like evidence. And I'm thinking storage lockers somewhere, although it would be more sophisticated than that, but still, there's an expense associated with that too. And I'm sure that you have looked at that, and that's part of the 81,000 square feet that you had mentioned, is providing for that sort of thing.
If I can say a word about evidence, it's not only storage, it's preservation. And so it's not just going to like you store it or something like that and dumping a bunch of boxes there. You know, we want the evidence secure. We don't want it damaged in case of like accidental water damage or anything like that. We needed to keep in a reasonable environment where that evidence can be preserved indefinitely. So it's not so easy to just like.
It's not just storage.
Yeah, we'll just go pick a garage somewhere. That's not the case.
Exactly. Thank you very much for that. And the other thing I was going to talk about is, do you anticipate in a future building or wherever we're going to go, being able to do more electronic recording of paperwork so you don't have the boxes full of records? Is that something that, I mean, obviously it's in all facets. Medical records are now all on computer. Very, very rarely do you see any folders of medical records anymore. And is that something that we could get away from in a new and more modern building?
Yeah, we've already started to go down that road. We implemented an electronic reporting system for all police reports last year. So we are starting to diminish the amount of paper that we're doing. And then one of our projects for next year is an electronic citation system as well. So we are getting away from paper in a lot of different forms.
Getting away from it is one thing, but what do you do with what you have now? Is it feasible to turn that into an electronic form for the time that you need to have it?
Absolutely. It's a matter of personnel hours to take it and scan it in.
I think that's all I have for now, too. Thank you.
Did I see more questions here? Colleen?
I just want to thank everyone for their presentation. I think it's one thing to read a report from an outside source, and it's another thing to hear it from our actual officers and to see the pictures. I think I've toured, I think 3 times now in various capacities, but for our residents who haven't been inside, it's really important for them to see these pictures and how our officers and staff are working every day. And I just want to say on that point, you would never know from interacting with our police force that this is the kind of facility that they're dealing with internally. The professionalism and the dedication that our police has is just paramount, and you would never know. So thank you all for rising above and being such great servants to our community. And just a comment on being ready for 21st century policing. I don't think we're even in 20th century policing in some of this stuff with not having witnesses and perpetrators interact with each other, not having the sound security that we need. These are huge issues that we need to address. And so it's just some things that I'm concerned about from hearing all of this is definitely the effectiveness and efficiency in our workspace and the overall morale of the department. I know of witnessing roll call and just hearing the things that you guys were saying, that it definitely is kind of a, you can see how it can start your day in a downer way, and you want to be professional, and so definitely better facilities are needed for that. Kind of everyone have been talking about the storage, electronic storage, but can we move to cloud-based storage then for some of this? Evidence potentially, depending on what it is.
Exactly. If we go to a cloud-based storage, there's a federal mandate called CGIS that we must meet certain requirements. So we can't just use any cloud-based server. It would have to be approved and vetted through the federal government. And again, there's certain criteria that we have to utilize. We've been working on this for many years. There are certain vendors out there that are CGIS compliant. A great example would be a company called Taser Axon. They sell a variety of products from in-car cameras now to tasers, as well as their initial concept. They've expanded now to body cameras. They offer a storage system that's all cloud-based. So especially when we start talking about body cameras in the future, this is something that's extremely important to us. We've been storing videos from our in-car cameras for 15 years now, and we've stored them in various mediums. Initially, we were on VHS tapes. Literally had a VHS recorder in the trunk of every car, and after the time it's timed out, we had to go back there, the supervisor had to take the tape out, and we had to store those for 90 days. We've now progressed to the point where it's a digital medium, which is stored on a server at the police department. But the potential for cloud-based storage is definitely there, assuming we meet those CGIS requirements.
And what percentage of training would you say is off-site versus being able to be in-house? The majority, or?
I would say the majority. We do the range training at the range 3 to 4 times a year, and we do a segment of in-house training throughout the year, but the vast majority of the classes our officers go to are outside the department.
And do we have to go outside then for tactical training as well, most of the time, or do we do that in-house?
We do a lot of it in-house because we want our officers to be trained together,
Okay.
to work together in those situations. But we do also, if there is a good defensive tactics training course somewhere offered, we will send officers to it as well.
Thank you.
And I think some of the pictures that Commander McGuffin showed you showed the tight quarters that they're using our community room for with the obstacles, whether they be the TVs up against the wall, the mats that we have to bring out. In years past, we've used different facilities. We've gone to Lions Park and used their facility for some of our tactical training. It's not unheard of. We've gone off-site. We'd like to do it obviously in-house, but if we have to go off-site, we have done it.
Just one more question, sorry, I thought of. Server storage and the server room not being cool enough in the adequate facilities, do we have room here in Village Hall in our server room to be able to, or is it because it has to be secure, we can't have it here?
Some server. Yeah. Some of the recording stuff for like interview recordings and stuff should be secure on site, and other servers could be located here. But
Okay.
it's how much space do you have here too? Because it's not uncommon for a department of this size to have 8 to 12 server racks. So again, how much space do you have here available too? And when we plan other facilities, often we do some of the redundant facilities at a new police station because we can harden the room too, and it's protected against, inclement weather and things like that. So.
Thank you.
I mean, I think we have an opportunity to host a lot of that server equipment, but you don't gain a lot at the existing police station.
Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking of putting people in the server room, I was just trying to keep it better cooled and stored.
I think a lot of our questions have been geared towards reducing that 81,000 square feet as much as possible, or perhaps using a portion of the existing police headquarters and in addition, another building. But I think, there's penny wise and pound foolish. We may be reducing footprint of a new building, for example, but creating all kinds of inefficiencies in the process. So first of all, I have to say, looking at all these pictures, it reminded me of my history of homeownership, where over the last 30 years, I've gutted 2 kitchens, and I've had to set up a temporary kitchen somewhere else in the house, a little microwave, a little refrigerator. Get you through the day, but you sure don't want to live that way forever. And it's like, you guys are living with that temporary kitchen now, basically the space has been outgrown. And listening to the various shortcomings, the lack of soundproofing in the interview rooms and things like that, it would appear to me that when this was designed back in 1990 or 92, there was no thought given to the processes of policing. It's like, we need a room for this and we need a room for that, and it was kind of crammed in all over. And I see a lot of frugality, but without a process concept. Now, that's not really to say that they were negligent in doing that, because people just weren't thinking about processes. Everybody knows about 4 or 5 years ago, we began the process of putting in a new ERP system in the village that caused all the departments that use the ERP system to think of their end-to-end processes. At ComEd and Exelon, we did it when I was working. We called it meter to cash. The whole process from putting the meter in, reading the meter, taking it all the way through billing and revenue accounting and customer service, we started to think about the end-to-end processes. And so that kind of efficiency thinking is relatively new, and I think it's been developed since the existing building was built. In listening to Mr. Lee, I get the comfort that you have done enough police buildings and interface with enough police departments to get a good appreciation for the processes. And I think that our leadership team here in the police department really has a sense of the need for process accommodation, but also process improvement. So, some of the questions we're asking about offsite storage, or how do we reduce, subsequent hands, on evidence, or the fat finger phenomenon, or whatever, that we start thinking about process efficiencies as well. Because I think at the end of the day, I think you've done a lot of that, and that's how you got to the 81,000 square feet. But maybe there's still room for tweaking without being penny wise and pound foolish and just creating all kinds of inefficiencies. This whole idea of security and safety of not only the public, but our officers, the idea that a perp could find out what kind of car you drive and follow you home. The newspapers are full every day of crazy occurrences. Who would have thought that our schools would have active shooter drills, or that we've had them in this building? The world has just really changed. And so some people might view underground parking as a luxury. It becomes a security necessity in many cases. We talk about looking at perhaps taking crime-free housing and putting it off-site, or a community liaison off-site. But then I think of a tenant and a landlord who are fighting, and they get in, and they're called in on a criminal or maybe a civil charge, and then you go, but if you guys would go down and talk to Pat Lyons, this would be all better. I could see those kind of synergies happening, and maybe they don't happen every day. But just sticking Pat in an office building somewhere, may not be the best solution, or putting Greg, in a remote location may not be the best solution there either. So I think you've made your case that the current situation is really inefficient. I think as we go forward in our next steps, we're going to want to look for the process thinking, without being short-sighted and building a building that's too small from day one. We obviously cannot do that. And I guess I would ask Mr. Cassidy, what do you think the next steps are, now that we have thoroughly discussed the shortcomings of what we've got out there? We've got a good engineer's estimate that we probably need about 81,000 square feet to do this properly, perhaps even some, rule of thumb cost estimates, but where do we go from here now?
We're going to continue to work the problem and provide a number of options for the board to continue, so we can get to the next step.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the board consideration is important. I know you guys pointed out some additional building maintenance that needs to be done over the next couple of years. None of that will be done without board approval and without thinking about where are we in the long run? You know, does it pay to do $500,000 worth of work if you guys are going to move out and the building's going to be torn down or used for another purpose, you know? So we have an awful lot of checks and balances to go on here. I know we have a couple members of the public here. Is there any public comment at this point? Mr. Goodman?
Yes, Louis Goodman, 310 North School Street. Well, as you all know, I'm real concerned about our tax dollars and where they go. But I have visited the police department and the fire department that we're talking about, and I've seen the pictures tonight, and I don't believe that the citizens of Mount Prospect are going to disagree with the board that, or the police department, fire department, that it is needed. A new building is needed. Now, you've got to find the acreage that's going to be able to handle this size building. And with that, I would like to say that my opinion is that you build a building big enough to handle everything, so you don't have to take stuff off the site and so forth, and try to find the acreage that building would handle all that. That's my opinion, and I thank you for it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. You know, one thing I've noticed as mayor, I get to visit other municipalities and to go into their public safety buildings. A lot of these other suburbs have these nice campuses with lots of grass and green space all around them. They need to add on, they add on. You know, they've got plenty of room to do that. We don't quite have that luxury. We do have some infill lots that are, you know, of some acreage. But we're not talking about building some huge campus somewhere because we just don't have the place to do that. So I think we've got to be smart in our design and how we choose to expand it. So excellent, excellent. You added that color, you know, that we needed to supplement the paper report here, and it's really important that we recognize. On the fire side, we're talking about police here, but on the fire side as well, the need for process efficiency. And I just want to echo what Trustee Saccatelli said and what others have implied. It's amazing, the quality of policing that you guys do. And I always use guys very generically, but I know we have ladies on the force, women on the force, so it's a Chicago guy, yeah. It's the men and women of the force. You do amazing work, you know, given the circumstances that you have to work in. We definitely thank you for that. Your attitudes are wonderful, and your results are wonderful, so we appreciate that. Well, I guess we're going to look for the next steps then to see how you would propose to more concretely address these concerns and come up with some potential options. Again, we're not going to be spending big bucks on anything until we've reviewed the various options and seen where we go from here. Okay, trustees, any other questions? Any other business for the good of the order? We have kind of a quiet weekend coming up, I think. So we'll look forward to that as we finish up our holiday preparations. If there's no other business then, is there a motion to adjourn?
So
moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.